This is lesson 14, One World Contacts Before Columbus. We've got a new chapter. It's the Voyages of Discovery. So, what was the Afro-Eurasian trading world prior to the era of European exploration? So, we're given a little bit of a background, or you might say context. College Board 1.1 is called Contextualizing Renaissance and Discovery. Explain the context in which the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery developed. And it says Europeans explored and settled overseas territories, encountering and interacting with indigenous populations. And European nations were driven by commercial and religious motives to explore overseas territories and establish colonies. And 1.6 deals with technological advances and the age of exploration. And it wants us to explain the motivations for and the effects of European exploration and expansion from 1450 to 1648. European states sought direct access to gold, spices, and luxury goods to enhance personal wealth and state power. And Christianity was a stimulus for exploration as governments and religious authorities sought to spread the faith, and for some, it served as a justification for the subjugation of indigenous civilizations. And then causation in the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery. Explain the context in which the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery developed. Notice how 1.11 and 1.1 say exactly the same thing. They're kind of bookends of each other, so it kind of goes full circle. Well, look at where we're looking at. We're looking at the Indian Ocean, not really the Mediterranean. Mediterranean's way up there on the far upper left. Well, the trade world of the Indian Ocean. The major crossroads for commercial and cultural exchange during the Middle Ages was not the Mediterranean Sea. It was the Indian Ocean. The Mediterranean trade network, that was a mere backwater. That was a mere sideshow. That was out in the boondocks. And yet European traders barely knew of the Indian Ocean's existence. Precious few Europeans had actually been there, and all they really had were fantastical stories and rumors about India. This map right here of the Indian Ocean Trade Network, it shows the huge trading hub that was the Indian Ocean during the Middle Ages. And the Mediterranean is barely worth putting over on the side. India was the natural hub of all of this Indian Ocean trade, and this trade network served China, India, Arabia, Persia, Indochina, Indonesia, Japan, the Philippines, the East African kingdoms like Ethiopia, and the Mamluk kingdom in Egypt. Japan actually figured large in Columbus's navigational theories, as we shall see. And the Indian Ocean Trading Network served Europe only from a great and dangerous distance. It also served overland African routes, trade routes from Eastern Africa all the way to the kingdoms of West Africa, like Mali, separated from Europe by miles and miles of Sahara Desert, as well as miles and miles of uncharted waters. Mongol emperors also opened China's doors to the West. They conquered China and they established a Mongol dynasty to rule over China in the late 1200s. It's called the Yuan dynasty. And instead of trying to suppress China, the Mongols recognized China's massive worldwide commercial potential. And so the Mongols sought to open China's products and markets to overland trade through their vast Asian holdings. The Mongols welcomed Venetian explorers/traders like Marco Polo. Everybody's heard of Marco Polo. He's on the commercial. Marco Polo was a Venetian. He was from Venice, but he was gone from Venice from 1271 at the age of about 17 all the way to 1295. And he actually worked for the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan for 17 years. And Marco Polo traveled along the Silk Road as far as it would go. Most people went over only a very short distance down the Silk Road, and they just go back and forth over their little area. But he traveled all the way down it, and he traveled extensively within China. And when he returned home by sea, largely through that Afro-Eurasian, that Indian Ocean trade network that we're talking about. And so when Marco Polo finally returned back to Venice, he brought back with him all kinds of exciting and detailed accounts of Chinese wealth and Chinese products and Chinese cities and commerce and splendor. And these accounts circulated around European courts for about 100 years. And Marco Polo's accounts fueled European dreams of exploration and wealth. Well, China, meanwhile, got its independence back from the Mongols in 1368 with the arrival of the Ming dynasty. So China was back to having an actual Chinese ruling dynasty. And China entered a long period of economic expansion. And one of the big heroes of that was the Admiral Zheng He. And he led several massive Chinese trading fleet expeditions all the way. He went as far as East Africa between 1405 and 1433. And he had several of these trading missions. But changing national priorities in China put an end to this kind of international economic expansion for China, and their loss would turn out to be Europe's gain. Zheng He's treasure ships were actually enormous. They were much bigger than the caravels that we'll talk about, that European explorers and traders came to prefer. In fact, on the bottom left of the screen there, you see the difference. There's a caravel in front of one of Zheng He's treasure ships. Of course, they never actually met each other, but if they were next to each other, that's what that would look like. So they were about 450 feet long, and that was way bigger than one of Columbus's ships. The idea of somehow, some way, sailing directly to India and trading there was very exciting to Europeans. Unfortunately, other powerful kingdoms controlled all the overland routes between them and the Indian Ocean, and these other kingdoms deliberately, for their own profit, blocked European access to the Indian trade network. And this made all of the products from the Indian Ocean extremely expensive for European merchants and consumers. All kinds of luxurious products. And Middle Eastern middlemen marked up the prices of all these products before Europeans even could get to them, even had access to them. And this was the state of international trade up through the 1400s. Well, let's talk about the trading states of Africa. The first powerful Africa-based trading kingdom was the Mamluk Kingdom in Egypt. They ruled from Cairo. They brought products from the Indian Ocean Trade Network up through the Red Sea, such as things like spices, like pepper, and textiles like cotton and silk, and luxury goods like porcelain and all kinds of carpets, dyes, incense. And these goods were in great demand in Europe. And to get these things to Europe, the great Mediterranean trading power of Venice managed to get exclusive trading privileges with the Mamluk Kingdom. And so the Mamluk Kingdom was conquered in 1517 by the Ottomans, whom, like I said, we will discuss in detail. And this is a very interesting picture because this is a picture of Damascus, and you've got a reception of Venetian ambassadors, from the city of Venice in Damascus by Mamluk governors in 1511. South of the Mamluk Kingdom was Ethiopia, and Ethiopia was a Christian kingdom. However, Europeans did not know much about Ethiopia beyond the fact that it was a Christian kingdom. The Mamluks stood in the way between them and Ethiopia. So European Christians only had sporadic contact with Ethiopian Christians. But Ethiopia was actually home to numerous large merchant cities along the East African coast on the Indian Ocean. And then, of course, we can't forget to mention the African gold trade. Gold came from the Sudan right up through the Mamluk Kingdom, and Europeans also got gold from ports in North Africa where it had crossed the Sahara Desert. And this trade route was called the Trans-Saharan Gold Trade, also known as the Gold Salt Trade, and it flourished all the way from the 7th century to the 16th century. And West African empires traded gold across the Sahara Desert for necessities that were difficult for them to acquire, such as salt, tobacco, cloth, metal tools, etc. Gold did much more than just make merchants rich. Gold made every king's national ambitions possible. The more gold you had, the more you could exert your power and your influence in your entire region. And gold and ambition went hand in hand. One of the most successful gold trading powers was the West African kingdom of Mali. Mali was an Islamic kingdom, and Mali's capital was a city you've heard of. You may not have known that it really, truly existed, and still does today, and that was the city of Timbuktu. Mali's most famous king was Mansa Musa. Now here's a medieval map of the northwest of Africa from the Catalan Atlas of 1375, and it still shows Mansa Musa on his throne with a whole bunch of gold, even holding a gold coin in his hand. And Mansa Musa himself had actually been dead for almost 40 years when this map was made, but he's still on the map. Mansa Musa is considered one of the richest men who ever lived in all of history. And in 1324, Mansa Musa made his obligatory Hajj. You know, the Hajj is the pilgrimage to the city of Mecca, the holy city of Mecca, and every Muslim is supposed to do that at least once in his lifetime. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And so Mansa Musa made his Hajj from his home country of Mali to the city of Mecca in Arabia in 1324. And along the way, it was kind of a goodwill tour all the way across Africa. And Mansa Musa brought a huge entourage and tons of gold along with him. And wherever he went, he inflated the economies of every city he visited along the way because of all the gold he was spreading around. Of course, he didn't intend to do that. It's just what wound up happening. Mansa Musa actually told a story about his predecessor, and his predecessor had been Abu Bakr II, or you can name him Abu Bakr, either way. And Abu Bakr was also, of course, fabulously wealthy as a king of Mali. And according to Mansa Musa, King Abu Bakr II led a huge expedition of ships and men across the Atlantic, and King Abu Bakr II never came back. Now, this story indicates that the West African kingdom of Mali was just as ambitious as any other kingdom for exploration and expansion and wealth. And stories like this one further sparked the imaginations of Europeans. I love this picture. This is a picture of an artist rendering, speculative, of course, a matter of conjecture, but it's a picture of Abu Bakr II, king of Mali, possibly visiting America and encountering American Indians. The slave trade before Columbus. Slaves were traded in great numbers all around the Mediterranean Sea. It was a huge highway for the slave trade, going in all directions. Slaves were bought and sold everywhere during this time. The church had outlawed a lot of the practices regarding the slavery of Christians. Muslims were also forbidden from having fellow Muslims as slaves. And Berber pirates, they raided Christian shipping in the Mediterranean and also deep into the Atlantic, raiding coastal towns all over Europe for a couple of centuries, going all the way up to England. And they may have captured as many as 1 million Europeans during this time. And Berber pirates were by no means the only ones involved in the slave trade. And Christian restrictions on Christian slaves and Muslim restrictions on Muslim slaves meant that there was a really brisk back and forth two-way trade for non-Muslim slaves for Muslims and non-Christian slaves for Christians. And there were many more slave traders than just the Berber pirates. And merchants from numerous legitimate powers were also heavily engaged in the slave trade. Eastern Europeans, Christian and non-Christian, from the Balkans, from the Black Sea, from the Caucasus Mountains, they were still fair game for non-Christian owners. And having non-Christian Africans in Christian courts and wealthy houses of Spain and Portugal and Italy, that was considered highly fashionable. Now, here's what we've talked about so far. So this Indian Ocean Trade Network, it was the center for massive worldwide commerce for centuries. It spread from Japan all the way to Africa. China was a huge commercial hub. India was a huge commercial hub. Europe and the Mediterranean, they were off to the side. They were in the boonies. They were a mere backwater. And Europeans were very much cut out of the main action regarding worldwide trade. Africa, though very mysterious to Europeans, was also a major participant in the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Europeans wanted luxury items, especially spices, and in another lesson we will go into detail about why spices were so important. Europeans wanted gold, they wanted slaves. However, the problem for Europeans was they did not have much of value to trade with. Few European products were of interest to non-Europeans, and this was a big problem for Europeans for centuries. It's hard to get other people to trade you their stuff when they don't really want your stuff. So there was a huge imbalance of demand between the two, between Europeans and kingdoms on the Indian Ocean Trade Network. The Genoese and the Venetian traders. In 1304, Venice, which is way up on the eastern corner of Italy there, way up at the end of the Adriatic Sea. Well, they established formal relations with Cairo in Egypt in the Mamluk Kingdom. And Venetian traders acquired things that were in great demand in Europe, like spices and silks and carpets. And they got super wealthy. What kinds of goods did Europe produce for trade? Well, they produced wool, they produced metal tools and weapons, and they produced finished textiles. And these goods just did not have the same value as the goods that Europeans wanted. They were just not in the same demand. So we Europeans, if you want to identify with Europe, we Europeans wanted their stuff more than they wanted our stuff. But the Venetians had a huge advantage, and that advantage was shipping power. If you cannot produce the things that your customer wants, maybe you can use your shipping power to go and get the things your customer wants for them. What merchants beyond the Mediterranean wanted was, number one, firearms, number two, slaves, and number three, coins. Venetian coins. Venetian coins were actually highly sought after in the Indian Ocean Trade Network. I mean, it's amazing because, the vast majority of people in Venice had no idea that their coins were in heavy circulation in the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And when Vasco da Gama, who we'll study, finally, quote, found India, right, which, almost no European had ever done, guess what was in circulation everywhere he went? Venetian coins, everywhere. And then we can talk about the Genoese slave trade. Keep in mind that the city of Genoa is up in up in the corner in the northwest of Italy. So you got Venice on the east side, Genoa on the west side. And the merchants of the city of Genoa specialized in finding new sources of slaves anywhere they could. Prisoners of war or refugees, North Africans, people from the Atlantic islands, anywhere they could go. Genoa, like I said, was situated there on the western side of the Italian peninsula. And so the Genoese were more interested in places to the west, like Spain and Portugal and the Atlantic Ocean, than other Italian traders were. Like the Venice, they were kind of focused eastward. And unfortunately for millions of people, the Genoese showed the Spanish and the Portuguese how to run a lucrative, large scale slave trade. And even though Genoese galleys, the ships that they used that had oars, they were not suitable for oceanic navigation and exploration, they even searched down the African coast and made some important discoveries down there. The Genoese actually sent an expedition to reach India by finding a way all the way around Africa in the year 1291. That was more than 200 years before Vasco da Gama actually did it in 1498. It was commanded by two Genoese explorer merchant brothers named Vandino and Ugolino Vivaldi. And of course, that expedition was never seen again. These waters off the coast of Africa are extremely hazardous. The search for the mysterious Prester John. Prester John loomed large in the European mind, and that's just about the only place he loomed. This was particularly the case as the Ottoman Empire's threat to Europe became more and more severe and more frightening. There had always been rumors of a distant, isolated, but powerful Christian kingdom somewhere out there in the unknown regions. And this kingdom had been established by, one apostle or another. And there were lots of stories about how far many of Jesus' 12 apostles had gone in taking the gospel to the ends of the earth as they had been commissioned to do. And in 1165, this mysterious letter started to circulate around the courts of Europe, and it was supposedly written to the Byzantine emperor. And it was full of all of these wondrous descriptions of this Christian kingdom. And Prester John is the priest king of this kingdom. And it was founded by the Apostle Thomas, and Prester John was supposedly a descendant of one of the three magi, who visited the baby Jesus from the book of Matthew. And was this letter a forgery? Almost certainly. Of course it was a forgery, but that didn't matter. People fervently believed it anyway. And there was all kinds of speculation about where this kingdom might be. Was it in Central Asia? Was it in Persia? Was it in India? Was it in Africa? Where could this place be? And Pope Alexander III actually tried to send a letter back to Prester John, but nobody knows what happened to Pope Alexander's letter. And after some decades, speculation basically kind of narrowed down Prester John's location down to somewhere around Ethiopia, maybe even Ethiopia itself. Now, why were Europeans so obsessed with establishing contact with this mythical Prester John person? It was because of the Ottomans, the Ottoman Turks. There was this sense that if they could just find Prester John and get his help, their problems with the Ottoman Turks would be solved. And that takes us to the Ottoman Turks. In the month of May, 1453, and by the way, this is a huge big mini-series on Netflix if you want to look this up. In May 1453, the impossible happened. And the impossible was this. This was a terrifying event for Europeans. It was their 9/11, and that was that the city of Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire. Constantinople was Europe's largest city. It had been Europe's unbroken connection to ancient Rome, and it fell to the Ottoman Turks. And the amount of slaughter and brutality after that thing fell was astonishing. And the Ottoman Turks made Constantinople their new capital city. Interesting side fact, most people think that the Ottomans immediately renamed the city Istanbul. Actually, in fact, Constantinople was not officially renamed Istanbul until the year 1930. The Ottoman Turks seemed to be militarily unstoppable, whether it was on land or at sea, and they were a very aggressive empire. And most of the Balkan Peninsula had fallen to the Turks by 1451. And Europeans were asking themselves if maybe this was a punishment from God for their sins. And there just seemed to be no limit to Ottoman Turk power. They seemed to be able to somehow summon up whatever strength it took to win every battle, every time. And there was a temporary stop, which began in the year 1481. And that happened when Sultan Mehmed II, you can also say Muhammad II, the ruler who actually conquered Constantinople in 1453, died. And when he died, Turkish expansion into Europe halted for a while. But in the meantime, the Ottoman Turks aggressively attacked their fellow Muslim neighbors. Well, every year the Doge of Venice, and the Doge was the ruler of Venice, every year he would conduct this ancient public ceremony in which he, quote, married the sea. Keep in mind, Venice was a great sea power and a great sea trading power, so this was a very, very important celebration. And one year, an observer was watching the Doge's marriage to the sea, and he joked that it seemed to him that the Doge had been cuckolded by the Turk. The Mediterranean Sea by this time had become basically a Turkish lake by the year 1521. Look at this map. Look at the Mediterranean. A good 3/4 of it is run by the Ottoman Empire. Well, the Ottomans resumed their conquest of Europe in the 1520s. And in 1521, Suleiman the Magnificent, also known as Suleiman the Lawgiver, took the city of Belgrade and made Belgrade into a staging area for future campaigns. And in 1526, he wiped out the Hungarians in the Battle of Mohacs, in which Hungarian King Louis II was killed. The Turks had modern artillery and modern muskets that the Hungarians did not have. But then in 1529, Suleiman laid siege to the city of Vienna, capital of Austria, one of the Habsburg capitals. And the only reason that Suleiman didn't take the city was because his supply lines had been stretched too far. So, what was going to be the European response to this kind of threat?